They called it charity. I called it a life sentence. Every dawn of my childhood began the same way, my knees pressed into cold wooden floors, scrubbing until my knuckles bled, while the smell of bacon drifted from the kitchen, where the real children laughed at the breakfast table. Day after day, year after year, that was my place on the ground in the shadows, watching life happen for everyone but me. My name is Helen Carter. I'm 68 years old now, retired after decades running a roadside diner in Oklahoma. Folks around here know me as the lady who serves hot coffee with a smile. But before that, I was a little girl in Kansas, trapped in a house that looked God-fearing and respectable from the outside, but inside it was my prison. Edward and Margaret Carter told everyone they had taken me in after my parents abandoned me. A Christian act of kindness, they said. But kindness doesn't lock a child away in a storage room. Kindness doesn't give the best cuts of meat to your own children, while the other one survives on stale bread crusts. Kindness doesn't make you invisible at the table, or remind you daily that you should be grateful for scraps. On Christmas morning, when most children woke to the wonder of gifts, I woke to the sound of paper tearing and laughter. I wasn't allowed to join. I wasn't handed presents. I was handed a rag. "Make sure the floor shines before the pastor comes by," Margaret would say, sipping her coffee, while her son Mark showed off his new toy train. The lights on the tree sparkled, the smell of pine filled the house, and I scrubbed always just far enough away to know joy existed, but wasn't meant for me. Not everyone was blind. Old Walt, our neighbor, saw me carrying water buckets bigger than my arms in the dead of winter. "She's just a child, Margaret," he warned once, his voice heavy with something like pity. Margaret only smiled, that cold, sweet smile she wore at church. Chores build character. And just like that, the conversation ended. In a small Kansas town, nobody dared question the Carters. Their reputation was stronger than my cries ever could be. So I learned to be silent. Silent when my plate was empty. Silent when my classmates went on field trips I wasn't allowed to join. Silent when my own so-called siblings pretended I didn't exist in the schoolyard. My silence was my shield, but also my prison. I didn't know then what I know now. Silence doesn't keep you safe. It buries you alive. And for 30 years I stayed buried, the obedient shadow, in a house built on lies. But lies, no matter how carefully constructed, have cracks. And someday they all break open. Silence had become my companion, but funerals have a way of breaking silence, of dragging truth into the light, whether you're ready or not. When Edward Carter died, the whole town came out in their black coats and polished shoes. To them, he was the respected cattleman, a pillar of Copper Ridge, a man who'd opened his home to a child in need. To me, he was the man who'd spent 30 years reminding me that I wasn't real family. I didn't sit with the Carters in the front pew. I stood in the back like an uninvited guest at a party thrown in my own house. The church smelled of lilies and candle wax. I watched Mark and Susan dab their eyes dramatically, while Margaret sat stone-faced in her veil, every inch the grieving widow. I knew better. She wasn't grieving him. She was grieving the secret that might be buried with him. The pastor spoke in that syrupy tone reserved for funerals. Edward Carter was a man of faith, a generous soul who welcomed a child into his home when no one else would. His words floated across the congregation, and I felt my stomach twist. Generous. I thought about the winters I slept in the storage room with a single blanket while Edward's dogs had better bedding in the barn. I thought about how charity tasted like cold leftovers and punishment disguised as discipline. Then I saw him. A stranger. He stood near the side aisle, too well dressed for a Kansas funeral charcoal suit. Polished shoes, a leather briefcase clutched tight against his chest. He wasn't watching the casket. He was watching me. His eyes trembled with recognition, as though I carried a face he had memorized decades ago. When the service ended, people shuffled outside, whispering condolences to Margaret, pressing her hands, as though she were the saint they believed she was. I stayed back hesitant, already halfway out the door, when the man approached. His hand shook as he pulled out a folder thick with papers that looked older than me. "Helen Carter?" he asked, though it sounded less like a question than a confirmation. "Yes?" I said, my voice careful, rehearsed from a lifetime of caution. He shook his head slowly. "No, that's not your name." I felt the air around me freeze. He opened the folder and slid out a newspaper clipping, yellowed and fragile. The headline screamed across the page, "Missing Heiress, 5 years old, reward offered." Beneath it, a black and white photo of a little girl in a frilly dress, her hair in ribbons, eyes wide and familiar. My eyes. The man's voice broke. "Your name is Margaret Hale. You were taken from Boston in 1959. Your parents, Thomas and Eleanor Hale, never stopped searching for you." I couldn't breathe. The church walls seemed to tilt, the scent of lilies suddenly suffocating. For 68 years, I had been Helen Carter, the unwanted charity case. Now a trembling stranger was telling me I had been someone else entirely, a child, with a family, a future, a fortune stolen before I even knew what any of it meant. "Who are you?" I managed, clutching the back of the pew to keep from falling. "My name is Richard Coleman. I was your parents' attorney. I've carried these documents for decades, waiting for the day I might find you." His eyes glistened as he searched my face. And today, I have. Through the church windows, I saw Margaret ushered into a black car, her veil fluttering as she turned her head just slightly. Our eyes met for a single piercing moment. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in her. Real, bone-deep fear. She knew what Richard knew. She knew who I really was. The silence I had carried all my life cracked in that instant. And in the echo of that crack, my world began to collapse. Richard's words echoed in my ears long after Margaret's car disappeared down Main Street. "Your name is Margaret Hale." The name felt foreign in my mouth, heavy like a language I'd forgotten. My knees buckled, and Richard guided me to a pew, his hands trembling as much as mine. He opened the folder again, laying out documents like cards in a game I never knew I was playing. Newspaper clippings, police reports, photographs that smelled faintly of mildew and time. There was one photo in particular he pressed into my palm. A little girl no more than 5 stood in a park wearing a red dress, white socks bunched at her ankles, hair in ribbons. Her eyes, green, unmistakable, were my eyes. "That's you," Richard said softly. "Taken in Boston, 1959. You were with your nanny at Beacon Hill Park." She looked away for less than a minute. "And then you were gone." My throat closed. I had faint memories I thought were dreams, red fabric, brushing my knees, a woman's laugh, the sound of birds. I had buried them under decades of chores, punishment, and silence. Now they clawed their way back, demanding recognition. Richard's voice carried the weight of a lifetime of searching. "Your parents, Thomas and Eleanor Hale, built Hale Industries from the ground up. Steel shipping, manufacturing, they became one of the most powerful families in Boston. But none of it mattered to them. Not really. They spent 30 years searching for you. They hired investigators, lobbied the FBI, even paid for psychics when hope ran thin. They never stopped. He slid another photo across the pew. It was recent, the colors faded, but clear, a woman in her 90s, standing with a cane in front of a sprawling brick building. Even age couldn't disguise her features, her jawline, her posture, and her eyes the same green I saw every time I looked in a mirror. "That's your mother," Richard whispered. "Eleanor Hale. She's still alive. She lives in a nursing facility outside Boston. Every year on your birthday, she bakes a cake and sings to an empty chair." The words sliced through me sharper than any punishment Margaret had ever dealt. For years, I believed I was unwanted, abandoned, lucky to have a roof, even if it was a storage room. Now here was proof that someone had loved me so fiercely they'd spent fortunes trying to find me. I shook my head, tears burning. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't anyone find me? Richard's face tightened. "Because you weren't lost. You were stolen." The church tilted again, the scent of lilies turning sour. Stolen. That single word rearranged my entire life. It explained everything: the false adoption papers, the way Margaret kept me at arm's length, the fear in her eyes as she'd left the funeral. "Your father," Richard continued. Voice heavy, died 20 years ago, but he left behind a trust in your name. Margaret, you aren't just Eleanor's daughter. You are the rightful heir to the Hale fortune. $93 million accrued over decades. It's been waiting for you. 93 million. The number was meaningless. I had lived paycheck to paycheck, saving coins for gas, stretching soup for days. Money was a language for other people, not for me. And yet hearing it tied to my name made the air feel unreal, as though I had stepped into someone else's story. But it wasn't the money that broke me. It was the thought of a mother still alive who had never stopped waiting. A woman who looked at every stranger's face in a crowd hoping to see mine. A woman who had sung lullabies into empty air for 60 years. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Helen Carter, the servant child of Kansas. I wasn't the burden who had to scrub floors to earn a crust of bread. I was Margaret Hale, daughter heiress, stolen child, living proof of a love that had never died. And with that truth came a new terror. If everything Richard said was real, then Margaret Carter had known all along who I was. And if she had hidden it for this long, what wouldn't she do to keep it buried? The word Richard used, stolen, wouldn't stop echoing in my head. Stolen like an object. Stolen like I was a prize someone grabbed and hid away. And suddenly memories I'd buried my whole life shifted into focus. Margaret Carter's sharp voice, her cold eyes, her refusal to ever let me call her mom. She was never my mother. She was my jailer. All those years I addressed her as ma'am, never mom, never mother. And she never corrected me. She preferred it, kept the line drawn in the sand, kept me reminded of what I was: a burden, an obligation, a piece of evidence better disguised as a child. Now I understood why. Every time she looked at me, she wasn't seeing a daughter. She was seeing the crime that could ruin her. I remembered the way she would stiffen when townsfolk praised her kindness. "We treat her like one of our own," she'd say with that syrupy voice she saved for church ladies. And then her eyes would flash toward me, warning me to stay quiet, to play along. If anyone had ever looked too closely, her entire life would have unraveled. Edward's gambling debts were whispered about even then. Nights at the tavern poker games that stretched until dawn, IOUs scribbled on napkins. I never understood why Margaret always seemed more afraid than angry when the bills piled up. Now I knew Edward's solution to his debts wasn't just crime, it was me. I wasn't a charity case, I was collateral. Richard told me later how they pulled it off. Edward took me from Beacon Hill Park, but Margaret made it possible to keep me. Her cousin, Sheriff Daniels, falsified the adoption papers. In a town as small as Copper Ridge, nobody questioned the sheriff. He told the story of the mysterious child left on the Carter's doorstep, papers and all. And that was the end of it. Except it wasn't. Not for me. Sheriff Daniels was a towering man, with a face carved out of stone and a voice that carried authority like a whip crack. I can still see him leaning against his patrol car, arms folded, watching me carry wood to the shed one winter. Later I learned he wasn't just complicit, he was an enforcer. There was a woman in town, Mrs. Fletcher, who once whispered to Margaret in the church foyer that I didn't look like any Carter she'd ever seen. A week later, Daniels showed up at her house. Folks said he told her to keep her mouth shut, that she was stirring up trouble where there wasn't any. After that, she never spoke to me again. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. How many others had seen the truth and been silenced? How many knew deep down that something was wrong? And all that time, Margaret sat at the head of the table, her hair pinned just so, her pearls shining under the kitchen light, acting as though she was the matron of a respectable family. But when the guests left, the pearls came off, the smile disappeared, and I was sent back to scrub, to serve, to disappear. The older I got, the harsher she became. I wasn't allowed to sit at the Thanksgiving table. I wasn't allowed to join the family photo for the church directory. Once, when I was 14, I tried to call her mother in front of Mark and Susan just to see what would happen. The room went dead silent. Margaret's hand shot out, fingers digging into my arm like claws. "Don't you ever call me that again," she hissed. Now I knew why that word had burned her so badly. Because it wasn't true. Because it threatened to expose the lie she had lived for 30 years. Standing outside that funeral, Richard's folder still in my hands, I realized Margaret Carter hadn't just stolen my childhood. She had stolen my name, my family, my very right to belong. She was no mother. She was the keeper of a secret so poisonous it nearly killed me. And as much as fear flooded me, there was something else rising too, something sharper, stronger. Anger. After a lifetime of silence, I could finally hear my own voice forming the words. She may have stolen my past, but she wasn't going to steal my future. The anger I felt toward Margaret after the funeral cracked something wide open inside me. For the first time, I let myself look back without excuses, without the story they had drilled into me that I was lucky that I owed them everything. What I saw wasn't a childhood. It was a sentence served in silence. My room wasn't really a room at all. It was a converted storage space off the garage, a single light bulb dangling from the ceiling. A mattress thin as cardboard shoved against the wall. In the winter, frost crawled across the inside of the glass. I'd lie awake at night, watching my own breath fog the air, listening to the scuttle of mice in the corners. Some nights I tucked the blanket tight around my legs, not to keep warm, but to keep rats from brushing against my skin. Meanwhile, upstairs, Mark and Susan slept in bedrooms with lace curtains and matching comforters. Susan had a pink canopy bed she used to brag about at school. Mark had his own television set by the time he turned 13. I was 13 too, hauling water-mending fences and shivering through the Kansas winter in a garage that smelled of motor oil. Food was another reminder of where I stood. Breakfast in the Carter household was a hierarchy. Edward's plate came first, eggs, bacon, biscuits dripping with gravy. Then Margaret's coffee and toast, followed by whatever Mark and Susan demanded. By the time I was called in, the platters were bare. If I was lucky, I'd get a piece of cold toast or the heel of a loaf. More often, I scraped the pots clean after washing them and ate whatever clung to the sides. But the real cruelty wasn't the hunger. It was the pretending. Whenever guests came over, Margaret would hand me a neatly wrapped present at Christmas, usually a thrift store coat or second-hand shoes, and say loudly, We treat her just like one of our own. The moment the guests left, the smile vanished, the coat was snatched back, and I was sent outside to shovel snow until my hands burned red. I still remember the first time someone tried to see me for who I was. Ms. Howard, my 8th grade English teacher. She had a way of looking at me that cut right through the rags and exhaustion. One afternoon, she pulled me aside after class. "Helen," she said gently, "you're bright enough for college. Have you thought about your future?" I wanted so badly to believe her. I wanted to imagine myself in a library instead of a barn, studying books instead of hauling hay. But Edward's voice was louder, drilled into my bones. "Kids, like you don't go to college. Kids like you should be grateful they're fed at all." When I told Ms. Howard what he always told me, she frowned, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. For a second, I thought she might call someone, might ask the questions no one else dared to. But in a town like Copper Ridge, the Carter's word outweighed a child's. Whatever concern flickered across her face vanished the next day. She never asked again. It was easier for everyone to believe the story. The Carters were saints. I was their burden. And I believed it too, because believing otherwise would have meant facing the unbearable truth that my life had been stolen from me piece by piece, while the world watched and applauded their kindness. Now, with Richard's words still echoing in my ears, I understood what that kindness really was. It wasn't charity. It was theft. They had stolen not just my name, but every dream I might have had. And the life I might have lived, college friends, a family that loved me, was gone, replaced by chores and cold nights and silence. But here's the thing about stolen lives: eventually, the cracks show. Eventually, the truth claws its way out, no matter how deep it's buried. And as I sat with that realization, anger rising in me like a tide, I knew one thing for certain. Margaret Carter's silence would not be the last word. The more I replayed my stolen childhood, the more unbearable the silence became. Anger had broken the dam, but anger alone wasn't proof. If the Carters had built their empire of lies on paper, then I needed paper stronger than theirs to tear it all down. Richard seemed to understand before I even said it. "You need evidence," he told me one evening as we sat in the back booth of the diner where I'd once worked double shifts to survive. "Not just clippings and old rumors. Evidence they can't burn, can't deny, can't bury." He slid a card across the table. "Linda Perez, Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation." Linda wasn't what I expected. She wasn't cold or intimidating. She was a woman in her 60s, gray streaks running through her hair, her eyes sharp but warm. "I've carried your file almost my entire career," she said, when we first met in a quiet motel room 2 towns over. "Every few years I'd reopen it, hoping for a lead. And now here you are, living proof the system failed you." She swabbed my cheek herself, the cotton tip brushing against my skin like a whisper. "It will take a few days," she said. "But when the results come back, you'll finally have the truth in writing. DNA doesn't lie." Those days felt longer than decades. I went to work, tried to smile at neighbors, but paranoia wrapped itself around me like a shroud. Margaret began showing up in places she'd never gone before: the grocery store aisle, where I bought coffee, the parking lot outside the diner. Once I caught her reflection in the window of my apartment building, her black coat blending into the night. She never spoke, never approached. But her eyes said enough. "I know you know, and I won't let you destroy me." Fear gnawed at me. I slept with the lights on, jumped every time the phone rang. But under the fear, something steadier pulsed defiance. I had been silent too long. I wasn't going to let her take the last weapon. I had the truth. When Linda called, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. "It's a match," she said, her voice breaking just slightly. 99.97%. You are Margaret Hale, daughter of Thomas and Eleanor, the heiress to their estate. It's official. I sank into the couch, the weight of 60 years pressing down on me. For so long I'd lived as if I didn't matter, as if I were disposable. Now science itself said otherwise. Every lie, every insult, every cold meal, it all unraveled under 3 simple words. You are her. Linda wasted no time. The FBI reopened the Hale file boxes of evidence hauled from storage false adoption records, witness statements, even financial trails that linked Edward Carter's sudden windfall in 1959 to my disappearance. We're building a case, Linda said, and when we're ready, Margaret Carter will face the law. But Margaret was already moving. One night I came home to find my apartment door ajar. Inside, nothing was stolen, but drawers were ransacked, papers scattered. On the kitchen table lay a single note in Margaret's elegant handwriting. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. For a moment, terror threatened to crush me. But then I thought of Eleanor, my real mother, still alive, still waiting. I thought of every winter night in that garage, every plate I cleared without eating, every moment of silence I'd swallowed to survive. And I realized something. Margaret had spent her life trying to erase me. But the one thing she couldn't erase was the truth, now running in my blood, undeniable, documented, and stronger than all her lies. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the scared child in the shadows. I was evidence, living, breathing, undeniable evidence. And Margaret Carter's empire of lies was about to collapse. The note Margaret left on my kitchen table should have broken me. Once it would have. But now, with the DNA results in my hands, her threats felt like the last gasp of a woman who knew her kingdom of lies was crumbling. Linda told me not to change my routine, to let the FBI work. We need her unguarded, she said. We need her cornered by her own history. 2 weeks later, they came. I woke at dawn to the rumble of engines outside my apartment. When I pulled the curtain back, I saw them: black SUVs, bulletproof vests, agents moving with purpose. My heart thudded in my chest. This was it. From the passenger seat of one SUV, Linda looked up at my window and gave the smallest nod, a nod that said, "It's time." I followed them out to the Carter Ranch. That old place had haunted me for years, the white paint peeling the front porch, sagging under the weight of its false respectability. The neighbors had always admired it, thought it was the home of a good Christian family. But that morning, as federal agents swarmed the property, it looked exactly like what it was: a crime scene. They pulled Margaret out of the kitchen, her hands cuffed behind her back, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. For the first time, the woman who demanded I call her ma'am looked small. Her pearls dangled crookedly on her neck, her black dress wrinkled. She didn't speak when they read her rights. She didn't have to. The silence that once imprisoned me was finally her own. Sheriff Daniels was next. He tried to bluster, to raise that authoritative voice he'd used to silence this town for decades. But the evidence was stacked too high. False adoption records, financial transactions, testimony from people he had bullied into silence. Watching him shoved into the back of a government vehicle, I felt a grim satisfaction. The man who once terrified me with a single look now couldn't even meet my eyes. The town gathered at the fence line, whispering, pointing, clutching their coats in the cold morning air. Shock rippled through them like a wave. For decades, they had called Margaret a saint, Edward a pillar of the community, Daniels a protector. Now they watched their saints fall, their protector revealed as a criminal. Their silence had kept me caged, but now their gasps were the sound of the truth breaking through. And then there were Mark and Susan, my so-called siblings. They stood on the porch, pale and shaking, watching as their mother was driven away. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt the weight of all the times they'd looked past me, all the moments they chose comfort over conscience. I confronted them, my voice steadier than I expected. You knew. Susan's face crumpled. I suspected. The way she treated you, it wasn't right. But I was a child, too. Mark wouldn't look at me. His jaw clenched, his fists shoved deep in his pockets. Finally, he muttered, Dad once told me if anyone ever found out about you, we'd lose everything. I didn't say anything because it was easier to let you take the hits. Easier. That word sliced deeper than any insult Margaret had ever thrown at me. My suffering had been their shield, my silence, their comfort. I wasn't your shield, I told them, my voice shaking with rage and release. I was your sister, and you chose silence. They had no answer. Only tears and lowered heads as the agents packed up boxes of evidence as the ranch, once a monument to their false story, was tagged and sealed as property obtained through crime. For 60 years, I had been the ghost in that house, the shadow no one wanted to see. But that morning I stood in the sunlight as the truth marched past me in handcuffs. Justice had finally come. When the black SUVs finally pulled away from the ranch, the air felt different, lighter, as though 60 years of secrets had been dragged out with them. Justice had been served, but justice alone didn't heal. I was still the woman who had lived half a life in silence, still the child who had never been allowed to call anyone mom. Richard was the one who said it first. It's time, he told me, gently sliding a plane ticket across the diner table. Boston. The city where I was born, where my life had been stolen. She's waiting for you. The flight was a blur, faces of strangers, the hum of engines, my reflection in the small oval window. For hours, I rehearsed what I might say, then erased it all. What words could possibly bridge 6 decades of separation? What apology could I give for being lost when it was never my fault? The nursing home sat on a quiet street lined with maples turning gold in the autumn air. Richard and Linda walked with me through the sliding doors, but when we reached the common room, they hung back. This was mine to face. She was smaller than I'd imagined, frailer, too. Eleanor Hale sat by the window in a blue shawl, her hair silver white, her cane resting against the chair. At first, she didn't see me. She was staring out at the falling leaves, lips moving as though she were whispering a prayer. And then she turned. Her eyes, my eyes, locked onto mine. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then she rose slower than she must have wanted to, and crossed the room. Her hands trembled as she reached for me, as if afraid I might vanish if she touched me too quickly. Margaret. She whispered, her voice thin with age, but strong with hope. I couldn't answer. My throat collapsed under the weight of 60 years. So I did the only thing I could. I stepped forward, and when her arms closed around me, I let myself sink into the embrace I had dreamed of without even knowing it. She smelled of lavender and old books, and when she pressed her cheek against mine, I heard her sob. I never stopped, she said through tears. Not one day. I never stopped looking for you. The words broke me. All the anger, all the years of being unwanted dissolved in that moment. I clung to her like the child I had once been, like the daughter I finally was again. For the first time in 60 years, I was home. Later, in her small room, filled with photographs of a family I never knew, she showed me a cake, baked every year on my birthday, candles lit, though no one sat in the chair across from her. She had kept my bedroom in Boston untouched, the walls still painted yellow, the little red dress folded neatly in a drawer. I always believed you'd find your way back, she whispered, holding my hand. I didn't know how to tell her about the nights in the garage, the hunger, the silence. I didn't want her to carry the weight of what the Carters had done. But she seemed to know anyway. She stroked my hair and said, "They couldn't take you from me. Not really. Love doesn't vanish. It waits." I wept then not just for the life I'd lost, but for the life I had finally found. Now, when I wake each morning, I carry both names, Helen, the girl who survived, and Margaret, the daughter who was found. My past may be fractured, but my future is mine. And if there is one truth I've learned, it's this: lies can bury the truth for decades, but they cannot kill it. Love will dig its way back no matter how deep the grave. After 60 years, I am proof. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Share your feelings in the comments. Where are you watching from, and how did this journey resonate with you? Your voice matters, and your story might give hope to someone else. Don't forget to subscribe to Domestic Tragedy for more powerful true stories of family betrayal and resilience. Let's keep this conversation alive together.